This is an RNZ podcast.
Just a quick warning. This podcast contains language and descriptions of violence some listeners might find confronting. When you're digging into an old murder case, having a copy of the original police inquiry documents is a must. It's usually a treasure trove of things like witness statements, exhibit lists, job sheets, and forensic testing. All the building blocks required for a murder charge. Sifting through it, you can find new leads, new witnesses, new information that didn't fit the police theory of the case. Because I've come to learn that the truth a jury hears, as with Darcy's death, is sometimes not the whole truth.
Because of some of the issues that appear to be emerging from this case, there's a genuine public interest in seeing this case to its rightful end. We've made a request of a series of files from different institutions.
That's investigator Tim McKinnell, who you met in the last episode. He's working on the appeal of Ross's murder conviction. Like me, Tim's interested in the 1985 police inquiry file. And also, like me, he was gobsmacked to discover the entire police file has gone missing.
We've been advised that the police have not been able to find the file. So we've gone back and asked some questions about that. Homicide files in particular are not files that get destroyed. They are to be retained permanently. The retention and disposal guidelines that the police have are very clear. So the advice that the file's been lost is troubling. And it looks like the file was requested as part of an investigation into another case. Around 2019, I think, was perhaps the last time it was confirmed as present. Nobody's indicated they've disposed of it. There is no suggestion that it's been formally destroyed. And so the question is, where is that file now?
Most people have probably never seen a physical homicide file. But as you might guess, we're not talking about a few pages or one folder. We're talking boxes and boxes of documents and exhibits.
It can't just slip behind a desk or a cabinet somewhere. Somebody has moved it.
In your decades in the criminal justice system, have you heard of a homicide file going missing like this?
I have heard of other parts of the criminal justice system losing their files, but for the police to lose a homicide file is extraordinary.
So what are the next steps available to try and have this addressed?
The next step for us, and it's a step that we've undertaken, is to complain to the Independent Police Conduct Authority.
My reaction to learning all of this can be summed up in one good Kiwi word: bugger. You're listening to Nark, an RNZ investigative podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wesley Smith. This is episode 4, Convict Cluedo. The search for the missing police file is ongoing, but without it to fall back on, I'm left to piece together the initial police investigation from interviews with witnesses, court transcripts, media reports, and Ross Appelgren's own papers. A lot of these documents have come from Ross's legal team and Darcy Te Hira's prison file, which I was given by his widow, Suzanne Young. My own digging has also uncovered some new information and witnesses. It's important to point out that both Ross's team and Suzanne understand that my job is to follow the evidence wherever it may lead, to independently report what I find. So here's what I've pieced together. Detectives at Mount Eden Prison back in 1985 also had a difficult start. Remember, there was no forensic evidence, no fingerprints, no blood, no DNA, and a crime scene cleaned up before they even got there. There were witnesses, but all but one of them were crims. Many who were wired to withhold information, more likely to tell police to get fucked, than give them anything useful.
Homicide inquiries or any other inquiry carried out in prisons are historically difficult to solve.
That's an actor reading from a report of the investigation by its leader, Detective Chief Inspector Peter Jenkinson. Jenkinson was in charge of the 35 officers that descended on the prison to investigate Darcy Te Hira's murder. Jenkinson died some years ago, but was an experienced homicide detective. Old school, no nonsense.
He was known as Jinky. He was a person who left a legacy of, I would have to say, what many aspire to be from what I have heard of him.
Former Detective Inspector Lance Burdett didn't work with Jenkinson, but knew plenty of officers who did.
He's always been reputable and has high credibility.
As Jenkinson wrote in his report, police knew from the beginning Mount Eden inmates wouldn't give up their secrets easily.
Prisoners will not inform on other prisoners through a misplaced code of honour among thieves.
Essentially, as no one speaks to cops. That's it. Whether you're in prison or outside, no one speaks to cops.
It's a code Lance has encountered before, because he's also had to investigate serious offending inside prisons.
Also operated as a crisis negotiator with inside New Zealand prisons. So a lot to do with prisoners and prison officers in my police career.
So Lance knows better than most what Jenkinson and his team were up against back in 1985.
It's very, very rare for somebody within a prison situation to say anything to police to help them, unless you might have something to gain from that, right? But you're putting your life at risk when you do speak to police. You're very suspect of what they're going to say to you. You've got to really look into what's behind what's being said.
In fact, in 2 decades of dealing with prisoners, Lance recalls only one that provided him with helpful information.
So they all have a hidden reason for doing so.
And it's not just cops that thought this. Here's Ross Appelgren's lawyer Mary Beth Sharp in a 1989 Radio Pacific interview about the case.
You've got to appreciate that the police walked into a situation where there were a number of prison inmates. The shadow of suspicion fell on all of them.
Eventually, in this real-life game of Cluedo, the police would decide it was Ross Appelgren in the lunchroom with the kitchen paddle. But it took the police some time to reach that conclusion. Nobody
seemed in the beginning to have any knowledge of who could have been responsible for the death of this man once it was ascertained that in fact he had died by foul means. The first inmate police interviewed on the day of Darcy's assault would eventually become their most important witness. It was the fraudster Ernie in the kitchen with the dish brush. Again, just a reminder that Ernie isn't this guy's real name. His true identity is suppressed by court order. Ernie acknowledged to detectives he was the first to find Darcy unresponsive and spasming in his chair. But that was all he'd say. At least, that was all he'd say the first time he told his story. And as we now know in retrospect, almost all of the statements which each person gave to the police was in conflict with statements given by others. There were probably very, very few statements at any given time which matched. So the police had an interesting job to do, shall we say. They had to find some witnesses at some point with statements that added up. One of those that didn't add up was the first statement Ernie gave to police. So let's hear what he said. His words are voiced by an actor.
I started work this morning at about 5:30 a.m. Darcy came into the kitchen at 7:30 a.m. He got himself some breakfast. And he went into the smoko room off the side of the kitchen. About 5 minutes later, when I finished my work, I got a cup of tea and went into the smoker room to drink it. And when I walked in, I saw Darcy lying back in his chair. He had his head cocked right back and his arms up level with his shoulders and shaking them around, and his head was rolling around and he was shaking all over. His plate of food had been upended. His cutlery was all over the floor. I thought he was having me on. So I gave him a shake and asked him if he was okay. And then I realised he's having an attack of some sort, so I went and got a screw, and a couple of them came in, and they lifted him off the chair and laid him on the floor, and they looked after him until the nurse and ambulance arrived. When I went into the room, I didn't notice any blood on him or around him anywhere. He was the only one in the room. I didn't see anyone go into the room after he arrived or even leave the room after he went in there. He's in there by himself. The only ones who have access to the room are us kitchen staff.
Within hours of Ernie giving that account, though, he had decided to communicate with authorities in a clandestine manner. By writing the note we heard at the end of episode 2, the one he scribbled with his left hand in the middle of the night to the warden, Mr. Dyer, saying, "Look for paddle in accident kitchen." Ernie explained why he did this at Ross's second trial.
It wasn't very much to it, actually. I just said that there was a paddle missing, and if they looked for the paddle, and they would hopefully, I don't know why I did this, I thought if they looked for the paddle, they could then look to who was using the paddle for the problem they had with Darcy.
When Darcy died the following day, the police probe was upgraded to a murder inquiry, the first recorded homicide in Mount Eden. Former guard Paul Lobb was there when Jenkinson and his detectives took control of the jail.
I was asked to clear the top landing of the north block, open up, clear the whole wing out, and then open the doors, and police came in, and then they brought all the prisoners from the kitchen up to interview them all at once.
In individual cells?
Yeah.
The other former guard, James, was also helping police that day, if not a little reluctantly.
I remember that the police came in, it would have been a couple of hours later, and various inmates were taken to various parts of the jail. I presume that they were kept apart so they couldn't cook up a story between them. I don't know. Our relationship with the police was very one-sided. They were very much take and not give. So, yeah, we would help them where we had to, but we wouldn't go out of our way to help them because they certainly wouldn't do it for us.
Was there some reason for distrust, or did they just not treat prison officers well?
Prison officers were a bit like traffic cops back then. They weren't held in the highest esteem. They were the sort of people you've got to have, but nobody wants to admit that they have them in their family.
My memories of that 24-hour period was that coming to work and absolute pandemonium.
That's former guard Mark Anthony.
Police everywhere. There were individual interviews being processed. They had elaborate setup of doing interviews with inmates and getting timelines done and all that sort of stuff.
Mark said when he came on shift that morning, the whole mood of the prison had changed.
The place was basically shut down for a while. Limited movements and that sort of stuff. A lot of undertones and murmurings and whisperings going on, and people giving opinions. People under times of stress they tend to talk a lot and that sort of stuff. So there was a whole behavioural change, and the whole place, things changed from that day onwards, basically.
Peter Jenkinson later reported the only talking inmates were doing was between themselves.
Initial inquiries carried out at the prison met with hostility and non-cooperation from prison inmates of the kitchen.
But at around 8:30 that morning, things took a promising turn.
An anonymous writer placed a note in the warder's mailbox advising the warder to look for the paddle, a reference taken to mean the paddle being the murder weapon. This note was received by the first officer and handed to the police.
Ernie's note had found its target, though police didn't yet know he was the author. Acting on the note's directive, Jim Stedman, the prison guard on duty when the assault took place, searched the kitchen block. Here's Stedman's account of what happened next.
I located a paddle, one of the implements customarily used in the kitchen. I found this paddle in the passageway leading to the wing. That is the passageway between the cell block and the kitchen.
Stedman said he found the paddle underneath a pile of rubbish and noticed it was missing about half of its blade. He then handed it to detectives. Ernie had led police to their first breakthrough. The broken paddle was rushed off for testing, which eventually found, nothing. No forensic evidence, no blood, no hair, no fibres. We've heard a lot of different stories about the paddle. Robert, the ambulance officer, said he saw one on the floor in 2 pieces. But prison guard James heard rumours it went back into the pot of boiling rice. So was it the murder weapon or not? Well, that afternoon, the results of Darcy's post-mortem came through from pathologist Dr. Warwick Smeaton, who found,
in my opinion, the cause of death was due to head injuries. The appearances suggest the injuries would be caused by a flat instrument.
A flat instrument like the kitchen paddle. Detectives now thought they could connect it to Darcy's death, even without any forensic evidence. In the context of the case, it was as good as a smoking gun. Now the cops were looking not only for the killer, but the mystery note writer. The search for more evidence within the prison continued throughout the day. A prison officer went through Darcy's possessions and found several items of interest, including $30 in cash and 16 cannabis joints. It was a discovery that became an important pillar of the case against Ross. Prosecutors saying it was Ross's dispute with Darcy over these drugs that provided his motive for murder. Meanwhile, up in the North Block, police interviews with inmates were ongoing. Just after midday, it was Ross Appelgren's turn in the hot seat. The following comes from the detective's record of Ross's interview.
At present, I'm doing 2.5 years for a whole lot of burglaries. I've also done an 8-year lag at Parry for robbery.
Ross was well built, tattooed, and no fan of the boys in blue. And just to remind you, we've used AI and audio from his Radio Pacific interview to put Ross's own voice to his words.
Since I got this last lag, I've been working in the kitchen as what is called the third cook. I usually start work about 5 in the morning. That's when our cells are unlocked and we just wander through and start making breakfast. All that I did yesterday morning was arrive at the kitchen sometime after 5 o'clock. There were a few of the others there, ones that wash the dishes and clean up. I think it was spaghetti for breakfast yesterday morning, and we set the first sitting out at about 5:45. There are a lot of other sittings, and we were still sending food out up until about 8 o'clock on Sundays.
The detective pushed for details of Darcy's killing, but the code of silence kicked in, and Ross refused to say anything helpful.
I'm not going to tell you nothing about what happened yesterday morning. I don't know anything, and I didn't see anything. I'm not saying nothing about Darcy or any of the others. I'll just tell you what I did. I just cooked breakfast and didn't see nothing at all. My lawyer is Mary Beth Sharp. If she had been with me, I would have been all right. I don't want to say nothing now because you might be able to involve me. If she was here, I would talk to you, but then she'd only tell you that he doesn't want to answer.
The interviewing detective then had this exchange with Ross.
I asked Appelgren if he would be prepared to tell me what happened to Darcy Te Hira if Mary Beth Sharp was present. He said that he would talk more freely if she was present. I asked him if it would help our inquiries. He said, I don't know, it may do. I asked him if it was worth my while getting Mary Beth Sharp to the prison today. He said that he would have to think about it overnight, and he didn't want anyone else knowing about it if he did. I asked him if he could give me a clue as to what he might know. He said,
No, I'll have to think about what I'm going to say. I don't think I can help you anyway, but I'm certainly not going to say anything more without my lawyer being present.
Ross walked out, leaving the detective to reflect on his first impression of the burly burglar.
Appelgren is an institutionalised criminal who is well aware of the dangers in talking to people in authority. He is for this reason extremely reluctant to say anything at all. He is, however, likely to know what happened to Te Hira, or may have seen or heard something that would be of assistance to us. He has indicated that he will only talk with a lawyer present, but is reluctant to even hint at what he might know. The arrangement between Appelgren and myself is that he will think about whether he wants to say anything more overnight and write to Mary Beth Sharp if he wants to make a statement.
Interestingly, the detective concluded Ross was
not a likely suspect for the assault, judged by his general background and demeanour during interview.
Although not recorded, Ross later claimed the detective who spoke to him had offered him a deal.
It was immediate release if I was prepared to talk. I was doing 2.5 years and they said I could walk out next week if I would name names.
I tried contacting the detective who interviewed Ross to ask if he really promised him immediate release. He never responded, but the issue of police offering deals for information would become a defining feature of this case. Another inmate police spoke with that day was the man we're calling Gordon. Gordon passed away several years ago, but in January 1985, he was 8 months into a 5-year sentence for a serious assault. We've had a couple of actors recreate that interview.
I'm with the CIB from Auckland.
Yeah? So what? Make it snappy, I've got things to do.
One of your workmates got dealt to yesterday morning with a big food paddle. We just got word from the hospital that he's pretty sick.
I've got nothing to say to you. I didn't see nothing.
Okay, you might not have seen anything and you might not know anything, but I'm now going to tell you what's happened. Darcy is in fact dead. He died about 5 minutes ago. Now, this is your workmate I'm talking about. He was whacked around the head and his skull smashed like an eggshell. I'm not suggesting it was you, but I think you might know a little bit about it.
If I knew anything about it, I still wouldn't tell you cunts.
Doesn't it mean anything to you that one of your own workmates has been slaughtered? How long have you known Darcy?
For the past 18 years.
Did anyone have it in for him?
I don't know.
Did you have it in for him?
You never fucking learn, do you? Do you think I'd tell you if I did know?
Now, listen, I'm not saying you were the one who hit him, but I figure you must have seen what went on.
How could I? I slept in late that morning and I didn't get down there till about 7:30 a.m. that morning. When I arrived at the kitchen, everyone was running at that stage saying Darcy had had a stroke.
Okay, perhaps you didn't see anything, and that can be easily confirmed. But you must have heard a whisper around the cells.
That was enough for Gordon.
I'm fucking off. I've got nothing to say.
By this point, Head Detective Peter Jenkinson knew all 18 inmates in the kitchen block had been spoken to and none had offered any assistance. And that wasn't his only headache.
Because of the time delay, the kitchen area had been cleared.
Police went back to square one and re-interviewed Ernie on the Monday afternoon. But he was still sticking to what he said in his first statement.
We were busy with the dishes and I did not see anything.
As police left the prison that evening, they were still without their killer. For the second night in a row, Ernie reached for his notepaper, as he later told police.
I wrote a second note in more detail to get a capture. I wrote the note myself. The note consisted of a page of writing, and I wrote it in my left hand in order to disguise my handwriting.
Here's what Ernie's second note said.
Paddle broke in half and hidden. It was used approx 3 times on him. I never saw it done, but moments before he was fine. Then next, a lot of banging, and when I went to find out, I was cautioned and told to say nothing.
Okay, let's pause for a moment and make sure you remember 5 critical words Ernie wrote. I never saw it done. That will become a very important detail in this case. As Ernie described, the second note was much more detailed, accusing the police of ballsing up by informing inmates of the first note, letting them know that someone had narked. But, Ernie wrote, given the paddle hadn't helped identify the killer, he'd give the cops another clue.
There are people who are acting suspicious and trying to joke and look very inquisitive when screws and police are about. These are the ones directly involved. But there's only one person responsible for the hit, which was due to a personal vendetta. But the other 3 knew it was about to happen and preoccupied the kitchen screw in his room while it happened. It was only, I believe, to be a bash he would remember for a while. But it's turned sour.
It was after police received this note they identified Ernie as its author. How they made this link is controversial, and I want to spend some time on it, so we'll delve into that in a later episode. Once police reeled Ernie in, they pulled him out of Mount Eden prison on the 10th of January 1985, 4 days since the murder.
My name was called and I went and saw the prison officer Jim, who told me that upstairs wanted to see me straight away. I went upstairs into the dome and everybody in the dome said, "Where the hell are you going?" I replied, "I haven't got a clue." I was later taken to the Auckland Central police station.
The next day, Ross was on the move as well, relocated to the notorious D block in Paremoremo prison. He wasn't told why, but in his prison file I found an interesting Justice Department report. Dated the day of Ross's transfer, the report said he was leaving Mount Eden due to his alleged involvement in the Darcy Te Hira homicide. So, there was no doubt by now, police had decided Ross was their man. At Auckland Central Police Station, Ernie met with Peter Jenkinson for the first time. Now, there are 2 versions of what happened at this meeting and in the weeks following. There's what the prosecutors told the juries at both trials, which I'll call version 1, and then there is all the parts they left out, version 2. Let's start with version 1. Ernie testified that when he met Jenkinson, he didn't tell him anything about what he'd witnessed. Instead, police agreed to give Ernie time to think about providing a formal statement. While he mulled it over, he was transferred to another prison for his own safety. Police patience paid off. On the 22nd of February 1985, that's 6 weeks after Darcy's death, Ernie sat down with Peter Jenkinson and another detective called Colin Mitchell. I contacted Mitchell to ask him about his interactions with Ernie, but he declined to be interviewed. Over the course of 10 pages, the man who'd earlier told police, "I never saw it done," explained that he'd actually seen everything.
He stated that the murderer was one Ross Appelgren.
In a statement, Ernie took detectives Jenkinson and Mitchell back to the morning of the murder. He said he got up around 5:30 and started his job washing dishes in the kitchen. With him was his cellmate, who I'm calling Aaron. Aaron was 25 years old and doing a 6-month sentence for theft. Ernie said at around 7:05 a.m, with the dishes finished, Aaron wandered back to the cells while he went to the lunchroom, which he referred to as the smoker room, and sat down with another inmate I'll call Logan.
In the smoker room, both Logan and I sat down, had a cup of tea, and a couple of minutes later, Ross Appelgren came into the doorway and told Logan and myself, "Go away," as he had something to do. His actual words were, "Fuck off, I've got something to do." And Logan and I didn't say anything, we just looked at each other and then we both got up and left.
Ernie returned to the kitchen where more dishes had piled up. At 7:10 a.m, he said he saw Darcy enter the lunchroom, which was about 20 feet or 6 metres from where Ernie was standing at the sink. Then, moments later,
I saw Appelgren with paddle in hand, his back to me, going through the entrance of the smoker room at pace. I then saw Ross swing the paddle over his right shoulder and round to his left. I heard the sound of a crack. I then saw Ross walk approximately 2 paces into the smoker room. He then turned around, so I was in a position of facing him, and I saw him swing the paddle from his left shoulder in the same direction as the first blow, and I heard another crack. The third swing by Ross was same as the second, and I heard something fall to the floor, but I couldn't see what had happened, and then I saw him swing a 4th time. Ross then came briskly out towards me carrying the paddle, looking into his left, looking to see if the screw could see him. He then looked at me and said quietly, "You heard and saw nothing, mate." He then said, "Remember, nothing." He then turned his left and turned down towards the passageway past the boiler, and I do not know where he went from there.
Ernie looked towards Jim Simmons' office and saw several inmates standing in the doorway. Meanwhile, Ross had returned to the kitchen without the paddle and approached him again.
Ross said, "Tell the screw there's something wrong with someone in the smoker room." I hesitated and went into the smoker room to see how bad the person was. I saw that it was Darcy in the smoker room. He's sitting back on a chair by the entrance to the smoker room on the left-hand side, with his back to the entrance. I saw that his head was bent back and his arms are shaking viciously. I did not see any sign of blood. I saw that there was porridge spilt over the table and the floor. I immediately took Darcy's right arm. I grabbed hold of his right wrist and I said, "Are you okay, Darcy?" I did not get a response.
Ernie then said he noticed a piece of wood on the floor, which he believed had come off the paddle. He described it as around 45 centimetres in length and curved at one end.
I then left Darcy in the position which I had found him, and I walked over to the screw's office and said to the screw, "I think there's something wrong with this guy in the room over there." The screw got up, and the officer then went to investigate the matter with me. The screw and I then went into the smoker room to where Darcy was still sitting.
Ernie saw the piece of wood again on the floor, and this time, though he didn't explain why, he kicked it to the corner of the room where he claimed another inmate later picked it up and disposed of it. After Darcy was taken to the hospital, Ernie said he had a visitor to his cell.
Ross came in and said to me, "Where's Aaron?" And I told him that I didn't know where he was. He asked me whether Aaron suspected anything, and I told him no.
You'll remember Aaron was Ernie's cellmate.
I've then said to Ross, "Why did you do it?" Meaning, did he hit Darcy over the head? Ross said that he wanted Darcy to be released from the hospital instead of being released from prison. He told me that a dope deal had gone wrong. He said that Darcy had picked up a dope deal that didn't belong to him and had sold it and was joking too much about it, and then he had the guts to show up here knowing who it was. I've then said to Appelgren, "Was it worth it?" To which he replied, "Yes, it was." And he further said that fucking $600 is a lot of money in the jail when it comes to dope dealing.
Ernie asked Ross what he'd done with the rest of the broken paddle. Ross told him it had been boiled and thrown out. Police thought this could explain why no trace of blood or hair was found on the part of the paddle that they recovered.
Ross then asked me what had happened to the piece of wood that had come off the paddle. I told him that it had been picked up and put in the rubbish bin in the corner. Ross actually thanked me for doing that, but I told him that it wasn't me. I was subconsciously trying to find out more about the matter, and I was not getting many answers. Ross then told me not to say anything to anyone, and he asked me whether I thought anyone knew what had happened. I said no, I doubt it. Ross said, "Keep it that way."
Ernie confirmed to detectives Jenkinson and Mitchell it was on the Sunday night, the night of Darcy's bashing, that he wrote his first anonymous note. All the while, Ross and the other inmates kept questioning his movements.
Where I'd been, who I had spoken to. I couldn't even go to the toilet without being questioned about my motive. So I knew my hands were tied, and I played along with what they were saying.
After Ernie was spoken to by police a second time, Ross bailed him up.
Asked me why I'd been so long and whether I'd said anything. I told him I said nothing. After he had finished speaking to me, he was satisfied that I had not told the police anything. Throughout the stage, the tension and atmosphere in the kitchen wing was intense. I did not know which way to go or who to turn to.
The only person Ernie felt he could trust was his cellmate Aaron. He recalled how Ross approached the both of them to say that he and the other inmates had decided how to respond to the cops sniffing around.
We were to take a screw with us and tell the police our visits were terminated as we do not have to see them.
4 days on from the murder, Ernie had his last conversation with Ross.
Ross said, "I'll remember you for keeping quiet," and that he would like to know me on the outside.
Not long after, police removed him from Mount Eden. Ernie had dropped a bombshell. In his notes, and in every discussion with police so far, he said he hadn't seen a thing, nothing. But that day in February, about 6 weeks after the murder, Ernie changed his story. He'd been afraid, but now it was time to speak. Time to admit he was the sole witness to Darcy's murder. Ernie's account was comprehensive, detailed, and as a court would later rule, sufficient on its own to convict Ross Appelgren of murder. But as it would turn out, another inmate had come forward to police to defy the code of silence. It was a bit unexpected, given this is the same guy who initially told detectives,
"If I knew anything about it, I still wouldn't tell you cunts."
That's the man we're calling Gordon. By 1985, he'd spent 12 of his 37 years of life in prison, the result of a rather colourful criminal history. Previous convictions for robbery, burglary and violence. Then there was the time he reversed into a traffic officer's car 3 times. His offending became increasingly more serious. He was in Mount Eden doing 5.5 years for tying a woman up and stealing her car. Given that track record, it's no surprise he wasn't inclined to help law enforcement.
You never fucking learn, do you? Do you think I'd tell you if I did know?
But on the 16th of January 1985, just over a week from his first hostile interview, Gordon was all of a sudden happy to help police. So why the change of heart? Well, although it would take years for Ross and his lawyers to learn this, it turned out Gordon had spent much of the intervening period cooling his heels in segregation, locked up 23 hours a day. We're not sure why, but to Ross's lawyers, it certainly looked like a tactic designed to get Gordon to talk. And relieved to be released, Gordon did just that.
A few days before 4 January 1985, I was with Appelgren in the kitchen when Darcy walked through. Appelgren said, "Look at the fat cunt. I feel like smashing him over the head now." At that time, Appelgren had a paddle in his hand.
Ross, Gordon said, was pissed at Darcy because some weeks earlier Darcy had pinched Ross's dope from its hiding place, a large teapot in the kitchen. This rang true for Gordon because
on Sunday, 23 December 1984, Darcy gave me a joint. This is out of character for him, and he didn't usually give something for nothing. Later, Appelgren said he was going to knife him. As I'm the butcher, Appelgren told me to leave the knives out, but I wasn't happy about that because I was responsible for them. I lock the knives away each day. Appelgren talked about still getting Darcy. He said that he would now use the paddle and not a knife. He talked about the lack of supervision in the kitchen over the weekends and that there was no instructor working, only a screw.
On the Sunday, when Gordon learned about Darcy's bashing, he said one thought immediately went through his head.
I knew then that Appelgren had seen his threat through. I went into the kitchen and said to Appelgren, "How bad is he?" Appelgren said, "Pretty bad. One side of his head is rooted." Appelgren said he had whacked Darcy 4 times with a paddle and said that the paddle broke in 3 places. I asked Appelgren why everyone thought it was a stroke or heart attack. He said there was no blood. Appelgren said before the hospital rang that if Darcy died, it would be the perfect murder.
Gordon's evidence was absolutely crucial for detectives. They now had their suspect, Ross, describing his own actions as murder. In other words, he had intended to kill Darcy. This wasn't just a case of a bashing gone wrong. Police had been worried about what we heard Ernie say earlier.
Ross said that he wanted Darcy to be released from the hospital instead of being released from prison.
They were worried that Ross's lawyers would use this to show Ross's intention was only to injure, not to kill Darcy. But now, with Gordon's evidence, that weakness in the police case was shored up. Convenient? Ross's lawyers would say yes, but for police, it was conclusive. They had witnesses, a murder weapon, and a motive, all pointing to one man, Ross Appelgren. So that's version 1 of how Ernie came to be the star witness for police. Version 2 is both murky and, to be honest, almost unbelievable, and has left me with more questions than answers. Coming up, we'll meet the 2 men who will end up facing off across a courtroom. The accused.
Are you a bad person? Some people most probably think I am.
And the accuser.
Reasonably intelligent and shrewd person. He was described as a very good salesman. He was a very smooth talker.
A man who for the first time speaks publicly outside a courtroom about a crime he said he witnessed 40 years ago.
I was flabbergasted after all this time that anyone would be wanting to open up such a case again.
Ernie told me in no uncertain terms his view on who killed Darcy Te Hira. That's all coming up in the next episode of Nark. Thanks for listening to Nark, hosted and written by me, Mike Wesley-Smith. I'm also extremely grateful to everyone who spoke with me for this podcast, especially Suzanne Young and Julia Appelgren. And if anyone listening has more information about this case, I'd be keen to hear from you. Send an email to nark@rnz.co.nz. Follow and listen to Nark wherever you get your podcasts, and if you've enjoyed it, use the share button to recommend it to a friend. Some more quick thank yous to Ngā Taonga and Mediaworks for some of the archival audio, and to the voice actors who helped bring some of the characters in this episode to life. Will Plummer, Nigel Collins, Nick Robinson, Taylor Sincock, Craig Genty, Hamish Webber, Justin Gregory and Jack Sargent. The RNZ producers who worked on this episode were Liz Garton, William Ray, Duncan Smith and Phil Vine. The audio engineer was William Saunders. Thanks also to Steve Burridge and Jeremy Ansell for the studio wrangling, and to Kevin Golding for opening the doors to me every week after hours. Graphics were designed by Amrita Marks, and the shorthand page, where you can find more information on this story, was made by Hing-Yi Kong. Check it out at rnz.co.nz/nark. Tim Watkin is RNZ's Executive Editor Audio, and Brianna Uritich-Gregg is the Production Coordinator. You can find more of RNZ's great podcasts, like High Vis Manaki, on the RNZ website, rnz.co.nz/podcasts. Check them out. Bye for now.